Media overview. Okay, so this pack is the Box Projection Mapping Toolkit pack. It is pre-rendered video mapping content to put onto cube-shaped objects. There is 38 clips, and included in the media is both the front free faces and the back free faces that you wouldn't usually see, already unwrapped. So the content will look like this. The top is the front free faces and the bottom is the rear, and next to each of those there is a handy little sidebar that gives you information and a couple of hints and pointers as to where the faces need to go in your output mapping. So in the top there you can see this is where we take it from, and at the bottom there it shows you this is where it needs to go in the real world. All you simply have to do is match up the corner points, which is A, B and C and D for each face, and then using that as a reference you can see where it needs to go in the real world. All of the information to help you with this I will include for the varying resolutions, so you can do it using numbers if you like, and then output map onto your geometry. Also, it shows there in the bottom right, I'll just put it back on screen, that it's a pan and tilt 45-45. All that refers to, guys, is that this cube happens to be rotated by 45 degrees on the horizontal axis, and then it's tilted towards you by 45 degrees as well, giving you this sort of corner on view. Okay, so now we're going to go into the longer, more in detailed version and walkthrough of using this content, some ins and outs, some pros and cons, a little bit of theory, and also we're going to show you some things you can do with it, so stay tuned. Before you do absolutely anything, what you first need to do is do some initial things to set up your Resolume composition and your computer, just to make sure it's all ready for the following mapping that we're going to do. So the first thing you need to check is you need to plug in your projector and make sure your computer sees it. So we need to make sure, and I've just got the display settings up here, that it can find it, which it has. My projector is display 2, and we want to make sure it's the correct resolution and that it's extended and it's not a mirrored display, because obviously we want to put two different things on each display. Now I'm outputting to my projector HD, which is 1920 by 1080. I'm going to make a comment on this in a little bit. The media we'll be using today is 4K, but I can only project HD. That doesn't matter, it just means we're downscaling, and I will talk more on this in a moment, but I just wanted to let everyone know that you can use this media regardless of how much resolution you can project. Okay, so it sees our projector and these settings are all good, so we can close that. The next initial setup you need to do is in Resolume, we want to go to Composition, Settings, and we want to set it to be the same size as our media. Now for me, this is 3840 by 2160. Now I'm using the full 4K resolution. I know you can download lower resolution versions from Resolume of things from the footage store, so if anyone has downloaded resolutions that are slightly smaller than this, don't worry, because I'll put all the data and info and numbers on the screen that you need to make it work for your exact scenario, so everyone can follow along. So I'm going to carry on with the 4K, and I'm going to also name my comp, and I'm going to call this Demo Recording. And you click apply. Now my projector is already, my display up here, output display, it's already showing in front of me, but I just want to demonstrate one thing. When you go and you're ready to put visuals onto boxes and you want to set it to go out from Resolume to your display, you select it here, you go output, and it would be, for me, display 4. I know that is my projector, and I know this is the screen in front of me Resolume on. If you accidentally click the wrong one, for instance like this, you'll see that it's quite hard to get out of this window because you can't really find a cross to cross it off. Now what you need to know is the keyboard shortcut to disable this output because you've clicked the wrong one, and that keyboard shortcut is Control-Shift-D for disable. There we go, and now obviously we know that wasn't correct, so it must be this other one. And there we are. There is 38 clips to this pack in 4K resolution. And there is a pixel map as well, which is an image file. If your content isn't in DXV, which is a codec for Resolume, and it is for smooth playback, what you want to do is you want to use the piece of software that comes with Resolume, and it's called Ali, and it allows you to then encode your video files to DXV, which of course plays back much smoother and nicer with high frame rates. So if it's choppy or it's starting to lag, I would suggest just check and find out if it's the right video encoding. Okay, so we've done our initial setup and now we're ready, and we've brought in the content to get creative and start mapping. So first things first, we're going to just set our screen here, and because I'm outputting to a projector that can't do 4K, I'm just scaling down the output to match. By default it's tried to output the same as our input, the composition size, and my projector's not quite that high resolution, so I'm just bringing it back down. And I was just using the test pattern to make sure that I had good coverage over the entire cube. Now we're going in and starting to do the mapping. So on the input, here I am, and I'm just creating a slice to do the Z plus face at the top left. And I know that in the 4K version of this media, each face is 1080 by 1080 pixels. I will put up the data for all the other resolution versions of this, so you know exactly how big each face is, but in this version it's 1080 by 1080, and of course 00 for the top left is origin, and there it goes and snaps into place. Now here I am zooming in to see where does it go in the real world. Corner A, B, C and D, the little white line at the top indicates the top side of that cube, that face it, just so you know exactly which way's up. So I'm in the output now and I'm doing match input shape just to make it nice and square, and I'm going to go now and use the little vertex points. Those are the inner ones, not the outer ones, because that is their sort of uniform transform. I'm using the inner points and edit point mode, and I'm bringing those points into the correct place, looking in the real world to match it all up, just like my little reference image showed me in the sidebar. Every piece of media has that little sidebar, so you can always just check in your clip and see which way the faces need to go, because of course if you put them in the wrong orientation and the face is perhaps rotated 90 degrees the wrong way, you would know about it, because it won't look great at all. So the next face, I'm just renaming it here. What I've done is I've just duplicated my first one, save a bit of time, and shifted it along using the snapping tool, and here I go again, zooming in to look where does it go. The red face goes almost a 90 degree clockwise, with the little white line just at the right side of the cube. So here I am bringing in each point. And by the way guys, see how it says X plus, or maybe it might say Z plus or Z minus. The pluses and minuses don't mean front and rear. That just refers to the whole object as a UVW map thing. This is how it was created. Don't let that confuse you. Just match the colors and the corners. And the final face, I've just renamed it. Let's zoom in, let's see where it goes. A, B, C and D, that's where it goes. And again, I just used snapping there, so I didn't have to punch any numbers in. Now because I duplicated my last slice, it's already put it in the position of the last slice, so I just need to shift it across. When you're doing this guys, you just want to make sure that you're not overspilling or there's any sort of bleed or spill onto the background, because if you do, you'll get a strange little border that doesn't look great. I always like to move the points once and then go in again afterwards and refine them, make sure they're nice and tight to where they should be. Okay. Okay guys, so I'm going to fast forward most of this rear faces mapping segment, as it is an identical process to what we've just covered. I did just want to explain though that you don't necessarily need to project all 6 front and back faces onto one cube. You can use the media to map the front onto a cube and the rear onto another cube that's obviously span around, and do this for a whole arrangement of cubes on a stage if you wish. And for a scenario where you do want to map all sides onto a single cube, one object, you would then need to use 2 projectors on opposite sides, of course, and then with both projectors connected to your computer, you would replicate your entire screen with all the slices mapped, so you have 2 screens, and then you'd be turning off the front slices for one of the screens for going to one projector, and subsequently you would be turning off the rear slices for your second projector, so each one is only getting either the front or the back. So I'm going to fast forward this now and we will look at some playback. Okay, we're all mapped for the front and rear faces, so I'm just going to click through a tiny snippet of each clip and then we'll move on to the next part of this tutorial. Okay guys, we're going to jump into a tiny bit of theory here. It won't be too detailed or in depth, just enough to help you out if you're a beginner and you want to avoid a few rookie errors, because there's some knowledge that unless you've got a bit of experience you just wouldn't know, so I'm going to hopefully share some of these tips with you. So the first thing is, when you're projecting onto a cube, I have a demonstration in front of me and there is arrows pointing out of each face. Now in 3D world, which is a job I previously did, these are called normals. It's perpendicular to the face, pointing out. That is the direction the face points in. Now when you're projecting, you want to try and hit these as perpendicular as possible, so basically from where the arrows are. But if you're using just one projector, you can't obviously do that. So what you need to try and do is find out what the average direction out of all these arrows are, which is the best place to try and hit these all as flat on as possible. Now for us, as you can see, the little white arrow shows that it's somewhere in this direction, and of course there is a little bit of play as long as you're hitting the faces as sort of with a largest surface area visible to the projector as possible. Then you're going to be using the best sort of optimal amount of pixels that you have at your disposal and therefore not wasting any. Which brings me on to my next tip, which is a bad example of mapping. So here we have a projector that is mapping down onto a cube, but it's taking just a tiny portion of this test pattern that's being projected on it. And as you can see, I've highlighted in red that this isn't a best use of your pixels, because you only have a limited amount of resolution coming out of your projector, so you want to try and use as much of it as you possibly can. And the same goes if you've got a projector that has a zoomable lens. If you're zooming it in and out, it has a higher brightness depending on its zoom. Okay, you don't want it to be more zoomed out and dimmer and you're wasting lumens, and the same with regard to what we've got in front of us on screen. You don't want to be wasting valuable pixels, you want to be using as many as you can. So next is something that I like to call the angle of attack, and this is something that does get missed quite often. I don't know the actual term for it, but I call it the angle of attack, and what that means is when you're projecting on something that may be slightly more complex, but still in our example here it's a cube, then you're going to be trying to hit faces, and you might have to move your projector, and you might have to hit a face at quite a acute angle, so not really as flat on as you want to be. That's fine, there is a lot of play in it, but what I wanted to point out was, on the left viewport here, this is a 3D package where I've just made a mock-up. On the left side, that is what the actual projector is seeing, okay? So if the projector had an eyeball in the lens, that's what it would see, and it is projection mapping, as you can see, a test pattern onto the cube. In the right viewport, that is my spectator that's observing this lovely projection mapping. Even though, in this example, at the very beginning, I'm trying to show that we are hitting the faces all quite evenly. That's nice, and as you can see, it's mapping without any distortion. There's not too much pixelation. If we go to the end, now we're still mapping all the faces here. The projector, as you can see, it can still get a good view of all the faces, so this is what we would call good coverage. But you might be hitting the face, but look at the amount of pixels that you're actually using. Like, to the projector's eye, it can only project a very limited amount of pixels here, and you're still trying to stretch out an entire face's worth of pixels into this small slither, okay? And if you look on the right side, what the observer sees, you can quite obviously see that the very left face here is very stretched and distorted, and that's because we are stretching a very large portion of pixels into a very small space. The projector can only project a tiny little bit because it's only a small part of that face that's visible. My advice is to try and get as flat on as you can and avoid losing any sort of surface area. You need to try and hit all the faces nice and evenly, which once again brings us on to my next point. Now, if you are following all these rules, what you will probably find is that after we placed our projector where that white arrow was, it puts our projector smack bang in the middle, which is ideal for the projector. But if we've got people that want to look at this and appreciate the projection mapping, there is a giant projector in the way, and if they want to go up nice and close and have a look even closer to the cube, they're actually going to be in the way of the projection, and they're going to be casting a massive shadow on it. This comes with projection mapping, and this is kind of why there's a lot of funky calculations, and you figure out the best format of your stage and you lay it out so you avoid this as much as possible. What we can do, instead of putting the projector in the very, very optimal place, is we can put it just a little bit lower. So in this next example, as you can see, I have a little camera icon which is just indicating that is where my observer would be looking from, and we've just moved the projector down ever so slightly, and it's still getting a good coverage, but it's also not in view of my spectator. So now my spectator can get a good old look, and he's not going to be walking in front of our projector, which is good news. So that's a pretty ideal scenario for one projector, of course. My final point, now I know not everyone's made of money, but in an ideal world, we would be doing this with more than one projector. Let me show you guys what I mean, and then we could scale that back and you could use 2 projectors or whatever. What this demonstration shows in front of us is someone using 3 projectors, and they're actually using one projector for each face. What they're actually doing is utilizing pretty much an entire 1920 output, if these are HD projectors, for each face, okay? And not only that, but they're also benefiting from the additional brightness, and they're also benefiting from the fact that if we just scroll forward, you can see there's 3 projectors. They've also got a big open space now where anyone can see this from a pretty decent range of angle. You could be anywhere around this. This sort of lends itself to stage setups. Maybe that's where you'd put projectors a little bit sort of upstage at the wings, or maybe you'd have them in the roof trussing down onto the stage. As long as you're getting a good angle of attack and your coverage is still fine, you want to try and move the projectors as far out the way of your spectator's line of sight as possible. So that about covers it. I'm going to move on to the next segment, which demonstrates exactly what you can do with this pack. Okay, so straight out the box, the simplest use, you could just project straight up 3 faces on a cube, and if you wanted to, you could stick that on the floor and it would look and work the same way. Hell, stick it on the ceiling if you really want to. Next, you could build a really big cube. You could switch out the sides and change it for holographic film or gauze, and then do some really cool holographic effects with your DJ inside it. You could also have it as a masthead at a festival stage, or on, for instance, an entrance arch. So people entering a festival could see one thing, and people exiting would see the relative other side of it. Another thing would be if you wanted to put the front on one and the back on another cube, you could do that. There is a lot more angles, by the way, that we have not yet set for release with Resolume, and we've also got structures, and if there's enough interest in it, then Resolume may be up for putting them in the footage store as well. So get onto the forums and get onto Resolume's Facebook if you are interested in seeing more of this on the footage store, and let's see what happens. Thanks very much, guys. That has been the box mapping toolkit walkthrough and tutorial, and I will see you hopefully in the next one.